There are wounds that cut deeper than any blade, the kind inflicted by those who should love you most. When your own family looks at you with disappointment and decides you're worth less than the debts they owe, something inside you breaks that no amount of time can fully mend. Sarah Bennett knew that pain. In 1878, in the harsh Wyoming territory, her family sold her because she couldn't bear children. They traded her away like she was nothing. Then a widowed mountain man named Caleb Monroe took her in, not for love, but because he had 3 motherless children and needed help. She expected servitude. He expected silence. Neither expected to find what they'd been missing all along. What happens when 2 broken souls build something beautiful from the ruins? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. The wind carried dust through the streets of Dust Creek, Wyoming, like it was trying to scour away every trace of hope from the tired little town. Sarah Bennett stood at the window of her family's farmhouse, watching the main street below, with eyes that had learned not to expect much from life anymore. Her hands worked mechanically at the mending in her lap, her brother Thomas's torn work shirt, but her mind was elsewhere, caught in that dangerous place between memory and longing. She was 26 years old, which made her practically a spinster by frontier standards, though she'd been married once. For 3 years, she'd been Samuel Bennett's wife, and for 3 years she'd prayed every night for a child that never came. Samuel had been kind about it, patient in a way that made her love him more and hate herself deeper. He'd told her it didn't matter, that they had time, that God worked in mysterious ways. Then the fever took him one brutal winter, and Sarah learned that God's mysterious ways included leaving her childless and alone. She had returned to her father's house because there was nowhere else to go. A widow with no children had no claim to her late husband's property that went to his brother's family. So she came back to the room she'd slept in as a girl, except now the walls felt closer, and the judgment in her parents' eyes felt heavier than any physical weight. The mending needle slipped, pricking her finger. A drop of blood welled up, bright red against her pale skin. Sarah watched it for a moment before pressing the wound to her apron. Even her own body seemed determined to remind her of her failures. "Sarah," her mother's voice carried up the stairs, sharp with a particular irritation that had become Martha Bennett's constant tone when addressing her daughter. "The chickens need feeding, and your father wants his supper ready when he comes in from the fields." "Yes, Mama." Sarah set aside the mending and stood, smoothing her worn calico dress. It had been her good dress once before she was married. Now it was patched and faded, much like everything else in her life. Downstairs, her mother was kneading bread dough with more force than necessary, her thin lips pressed into a line that spoke of disappointment and worry in equal measure. Martha Bennett had been pretty once, but years of hard frontier life had carved that prettiness away, leaving behind something weathered and sharp. "There's talk in town," Martha said without looking up from her work. "About you." Sarah felt her stomach tighten, but she kept her voice steady. "There's always talk. Ezekiel Stone was asking after you again. Your father says he's serious this time." The name made Sarah's hands still over the egg basket. Ezekiel Stone was 50 if he was a day, a merchant who'd grown wealthy by being the only real source of goods in a 3-day radius. He was also a man whose first wife had died under circumstances the town preferred not to examine too closely. Sarah had seen the fear in that woman's eyes more than once before she fell down those convenient stairs. "I'm not interested in Mr. Stone," Sarah said quietly. "Not interested?" Her mother's hands stilled in the dough. "Sarah, you're in no position to be particular. You're a barren woman living on your father's charity. Stone is willing to overlook that considerable flaw. Do you know how rare that is?" The word barren hit like a physical blow, though Sarah had heard it often enough to have built up calluses around it. Still, hearing it from her own mother never got easier. I won't marry a man I fear, Sarah said, lifting her chin. Martha's laugh was bitter. Fear. What do you think marriage is for women like us? We don't get to marry for love or comfort. We marry for survival. Your father and I married because his family had land and mine had nothing. We survived. You'll survive. Sarah wanted to argue that her mother's marriage, loveless as it might be, had never included bruises hidden beneath long sleeves. But she knew better than to push. Instead, she took the egg basket and headed for the door. The chickens clucked and scattered as she entered their yard, and Sarah found a moment of peace in the simple task of gathering eggs. Out here, no one judged her for what her body couldn't do. The hens didn't care that she was barren. They just laid their eggs and lived their simple lives. She was reaching into the last nesting box when she heard the sound of horses in the street. Sarah looked up to see a wagon rolling past, driven by a man she recognized from town. One of the trappers who came down from the mountains a few times a year to trade pelts and buy supplies. Caleb Monroe. She knew his name the way everyone in a small town knows everyone else's name, through gossip and observation rather than actual conversation. He kept to himself mostly, had a homestead somewhere up in the high country. His wife had died a couple of years back. Childbirth, the women whispered. Another reminder of how dangerous it was to be female on the frontier. 3 children sat in the back of his wagon, and Sarah felt that familiar ache in her chest. The oldest was a girl, maybe 9 or 10, with serious eyes and her father's dark hair. A boy around 6 bounced excitedly, pointing at things in town, while a tiny girl, no more than 3, clutched a rag doll and sucked her thumb. Caleb Monroe himself was a tall man, broad-shouldered from hard work, with a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. He guided his horses with capable hands, his eyes scanning the street with the wariness of someone who'd learned not to trust easily. For just a moment, their eyes met. Sarah felt something pass between them, not attraction exactly, but a kind of recognition. 2 people who understood loss, who carried grief like a second skin. Then the wagon moved on, and the moment passed. Sarah finished gathering the eggs and headed back inside, but the image of those 3 motherless children stayed with her. She wondered who was caring for them, who was braiding the little girl's hair and mending the boy's torn pants. She wondered if they cried at night for their mama, the way she used to cry for the children she'd never have. That evening, her father came in from the fields with her brothers, Thomas and William. They were men now, though Sarah still sometimes saw them as the boys who'd pulled her braids and stolen cookies from her pocket. They'd grown hard like the land, their faces weathered beyond their years. James Bennett was a stern man who believed in hard work, harder discipline, and the unquestionable authority of men over their households. He sat at the head of the table in silence while Sarah and her mother served supper, venison stew and fresh bread, then blessed the food with a prayer that felt more like a formality than a conversation with God. "Saw Ezekiel Stone in town today," James said, tearing off a piece of bread. "He made me a proposition." Sarah's hand tightened on her fork, but she kept her eyes on her plate. "What kind of proposition?" Martha asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "He'll forgive our debt to his store if we give him Sarah in marriage." The words hung in the air like smoke from a rifle shot. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Give him Sarah, as if she were a commodity to be traded, no different from a horse or a bolt of cloth. "Father," she began, but he cut her off with a look. "We owe Stone near $300, Sarah. $300 we don't have and can't pay. This farm is barely keeping us fed as it is. The drought last summer near killed us, and we lost half the herd to that illness in the spring." "There has to be another way," Sarah said, hating how her voice shook. "There isn't." Her father's tone was flat, final. "You're a burden to this family. You eat our food, use our resources, and bring nothing of value in return. A woman's purpose is to bear children and keep a household. You can't do the first, and we don't need you for the second. Each word was a knife, precisely placed and deliberately cruel. Sarah looked at her mother, hoping for some defense, some maternal protection, but Martha just stared at her plate, her silence more damning than any words. "I won't do it," Sarah whispered. James Bennett's fist hit the table, making the dishes jump. "You'll do as you're told. I'm your father, and under God and territorial law, you're under my authority until you're under a husband's authority. Stone is willing to take you despite your defect. You should be grateful." Grateful. Sarah's voice rose despite her efforts to control it. He beat his first wife. Everyone knows it, even if no one will say it out loud. You're asking me to marry a man who'll hurt me. Then don't give him reason to, Thomas muttered, and Sarah felt something inside her crack at her brother's casual cruelty. She stood, her chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. "I won't do this. I won't." "Then you'll leave this house with nothing but the clothes on your back," her father said coldly. "And good luck surviving out there alone. A woman with no money, no family, and no prospects. See how far you get." Sarah looked around the table at the faces of her family, the people who should have loved her, protected her, valued her. Instead, she saw calculation, indifference, and cold practicality. She saw people who'd already made their decision, who'd already traded her away in their minds. She fled to her room, tears finally breaking free. Through her window, she could see the mountains rising in the distance, dark shapes against the evening sky. Somewhere up there, Caleb Monroe was probably putting his children to bed, telling them stories, trying to fill the hole their mother had left behind. Sarah pressed her hand against the glass, feeling the cool surface against her palm. She wore her mother's wedding ring on a chain around her neck, the only thing she had left from her brief, happy marriage. She pulled it out now, looking at the simple gold band. Samuel would have fought for her. Samuel would never have treated her like property to be sold. But Samuel was dead, and Sarah was alone in a world that saw her as worthless. She didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed, listening to the house settle and creak around her, and wondered what kind of hell awaited her in Ezekiel Stone's house. She wondered if she'd survive it. She wondered if she'd even want to. The mountains outside her window stood silent and dark, keeping their secrets. Sarah didn't know it yet, but those mountains would become her salvation. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives are just doorways we have to walk through to reach the best ones. But on that night, all Sarah knew was fear, shame, and the bitter taste of betrayal. 3 days passed in a fog of dread. Sarah went through the motions of daily life, cooking, cleaning, mending, while her family treated her with a strange mixture of relief and avoidance. They'd made their decision, and now they were just waiting for it to be executed. On the third night, Sarah woke to voices drifting up from downstairs, her father's rumble and another voice, oily and self-satisfied. Ezekiel Stone. She crept to the top of the stairs, her heart pounding, and listened. "I want the arrangement formalized," Stone was saying. "A proper bill of sale, signed and witnessed. I won't have her family coming back later claiming I forced anything. A bill of sale, like she was livestock." "That's not necessary," her father said, but his voice lacked conviction. "A handshake between men is worth nothing if challenged," Stone interrupted. "I've drawn up papers. You sign over custody of Sarah to me in exchange for forgiveness of your debt. Clean, legal, final." Sarah heard the rustle of papers, the scratch of a pen. Her father was signing away his daughter like she was a piece of property. She gripped the stair railing so hard her knuckles went white. "When do you want her?" James Bennett's voice was flat, businesslike. 3 days. That gives me time to prepare the house. And James, make sure she understands that any resistance will be dealt with firmly. I won't tolerate a disobedient wife." After Stone left, Sarah sat on the stairs in the darkness, trembling. 3 days. In 3 days, She'd be locked in that house with a man who'd killed his first wife. In 3 days, her life as she knew it would end. She couldn't let it happen. The next morning, Sarah waited until her father and brothers left for the fields, then approached her mother in the kitchen. Martha was churning butter, her movements mechanical and tired. "Mama, please," Sarah said quietly. "Don't let him do this." Martha's hands stilled on the churn, but she didn't look up. "It's already done, Sarah." "Then help me leave. Give me a little money, enough to get to Cheyenne or Denver. I could find work, I could. And shame this family further." Now Martha did look up, and her eyes were hard. "You running away would make your father look weak. Stone would still demand his debt be paid, and we'd lose the farm. Is that what you want? Your family homeless because you're too proud to do your duty?" "My duty," Sarah's voice cracked. "My duty is to let myself be beaten and possibly killed." "Your duty is to your family," Martha said firmly. "I did mine. I married a man I didn't love and bore his children and kept his house for 30 years. You'll do the same. You were never afraid Father would kill you." Something flickered in Martha's eyes. Was it doubt? Guilt? But it vanished as quickly as it came. "Then be clever enough not to anger your husband. Now I have work to do, and so do you." Sarah tried to run that afternoon. She packed a small bundle of clothes, took what little money she'd saved from selling eggs, and slipped out while her mother was hanging laundry. She made it to the edge of town before Thomas caught her. "Where do you think you're going?" He grabbed her arm, his grip bruising. "Let me go, Thomas, please. So you can shame us, make Father look like he can't control his own daughter." He dragged her back toward the house, ignoring her struggles. "You're being selfish, Sarah. Think about someone other than yourself for once." William was waiting at the house, and between the two of them, they locked her in her room. Sarah pounded on the door until her fists were bruised, screaming until her voice was raw. No one came. No one cared. She spent that night curled on her bed, clutching her mother's wedding ring and praying for a miracle that didn't seem likely to come. The next morning dawned clear and bright, mocking her despair. Sarah heard activity downstairs, voices, footsteps. Then her mother unlocked the door. "Get dressed," Martha said curtly. "In your good dress. Stone's coming for you at noon." "Mama." "Don't." Martha's voice was sharp as broken glass. "Just don't. Make this easier on all of us." Sarah dressed mechanically, her hands shaking so badly she could barely button her dress. This was it. This was the end of any hope she'd had for a decent life. She'd be Mrs. Ezekiel Stone, and everyone would know she was sold to him like cattle, and eventually she'd end up like his first wife, dead at the bottom of the stairs, or from some other accident. When she came downstairs, her family was waiting in the parlor like they were attending a funeral. In a way, they were. Hers. Through the window, Sarah could see half the town gathering in the street. Word had gotten out about the arrangement, and people had come to witness the spectacle. Among them, she spotted Caleb Monroe's wagon. He'd come to town for supplies, his 3 children with him. The little girl, Grace, Sarah remembered someone calling her, was clinging to her father's hand while the older 2 examined a display in the store window. Then Ezekiel Stone arrived, dressed in his finest suit, looking like a spider coming to claim a fly from his web. He smiled at Sarah, and the expression made her skin crawl. "There's my bride," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "Don't you look lovely?" Sarah said nothing. She'd learned that silence was sometimes the only form of resistance available to women in her position. Stone approached her father with the papers, the bill of sale that would transfer ownership of Sarah from one man to another. James Bennett took them, read them over, then reached for the pen. "Wait," the voice came from the doorway. Everyone turned to see Caleb Monroe standing there, his hat in his hands, his 3 children clustered behind him. He looked uncomfortable, like a man who'd rather face a grizzly bear than a room full of people, but his jaw was set with determination. "This is a private family matter," Stone said coldly. "I have a counteroffer," Caleb said, his voice low but carrying. He looked at James Bennett. "You need your debt forgiven. I can pay it." The room went silent. Sarah's heart began to pound for an entirely different reason. "And what do you want in return?" James asked suspiciously. Caleb's eyes flickered to Sarah, then away. "I need help with my children. My wife died 2 years ago, and I can't manage the trap lines and 3 children alone. Sarah would come to my homestead. She'd care for the children, keep the house. In exchange, I'd pay your debt in full." "That's the same arrangement I'm offering," Stone snapped, "except I'm willing to marry her properly." "Are you offering marriage?" James asked Caleb. Caleb hesitated, and Sarah saw the conflict in his face. "No," he said finally. "I'm offering employment, honest work for honest pay. She'd have her own room, her own space. She'd be free to leave if she chose, once she'd worked off the debt." "That's ridiculous," Stone said. "An unmarried woman living with a widower. The scandal would be less than forcing a woman into a marriage she doesn't want," Caleb interrupted, and his eyes met Sarah's for the first time. She saw no lust there, no cruelty, just a tired man offering what help he could. The choice should be hers. Everyone looked at Sarah. For the first time since this nightmare began, someone was acknowledging that she had a choice. It wasn't much of one, servitude to a stranger or marriage to a monster, but it was more than her own family had offered her. "I'll go with Mr. Monroe," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Stone's face went purple with rage. "This is unacceptable. We had an agreement." "We had a discussion," James Bennett said slowly, and Sarah saw the calculation in his eyes. "Monroe's offering cash money, full payment. You are offering debt forgiveness. If I'm going to lose my daughter either way, I might as well take the better deal." It all came down to money in the end. Sarah shouldn't have been surprised. Stone's hand moved to his belt, and for a moment Sarah thought he might draw a weapon. But Caleb Monroe stepped forward, positioning himself between Stone and Sarah, and something in his stance, the confidence of a man who'd faced down worse things than an angry merchant, made Stone reconsider. "This isn't over," Stone hissed. "That woman was promised to me. I have rights." "You have nothing," Caleb said quietly. "She's not property. She's a person, and she's made her choice." The transaction was completed quickly after that. Caleb counted out the money. Sarah tried not to think about how many months of hard work that represented, and her father signed a different paper, this one releasing Sarah from his household. Not a bill of sale, at least. That was something. Sarah was allowed to gather her meager belongings. She took her few dresses, her mother's wedding ring, her worn Bible, and little else. She'd come to this house with nothing, and she was leaving with barely more. Her mother didn't say goodbye. Her brothers didn't meet her eyes. Her father counted his money and looked relieved to be rid of her. Outside, the town watched in silence as Sarah climbed into Caleb Monroe's wagon. The 3 children stared at her with open curiosity and wariness. She tried to smile at them, but her face felt frozen. Caleb took his seat and gathered the reins. Before he could snap them, Sarah looked back at the house where she'd grown up, where she'd been born, where she'd played as a child, where she'd dreamed of her future. She was leaving it forever, going to the home of a stranger, to care for children who weren't hers, to live a life she'd never imagined. As they pulled away, she saw Ezekiel Stone standing in the street, watching her with cold, furious eyes. The look promised that he meant what he'd said. This wasn't over. He would make her regret choosing Caleb Monroe over him. But for now, Sarah was free of him, free of her family, free of everything except the debt that bound her to the silent man beside her and the uncertain future that lay ahead in the mountains. She touched the ring hanging around her neck and whispered a prayer for strength. She was going to need it. The first snow came in early October, dusting the peaks white and turning the world quiet. Sarah woke to find frost patterns on her window and knew that winter would soon trap them all in this small cabin together, dependent on each other in ways that went beyond simple employment. She'd been with the Monroe family for 2 months now, and the rhythm of their days had become as familiar as breathing. She knew that Caleb took his coffee black and strong, that Samuel woke up talking and didn't stop until sleep claimed him again, that Emma hid her grief behind fierce competence, and that Grace was slowly, carefully learning to trust again. The breakthrough with Grace had opened something. The little girl now followed Sarah around the cabin, helping in her small way, holding the dustpan while Sarah swept, carrying spoons to the table, sitting close during story time. She still didn't talk much, but her silence had become comfortable rather than frightened. Emma was harder to read. She'd stopped being openly hostile, but she watched Sarah with eyes that seemed to be constantly evaluating, measuring, judging. One evening, she approached Sarah with something clutched in her hands. "I found this in Mama's trunk," Emma said, her voice carefully neutral. She unfolded a half-finished quilt, the patches carefully pieced together in a pattern of blues and greens. She was making it for the bed. She never got to finish it. Sarah touched the fabric gently, seeing Rebecca's careful stitches, her eye for color and design. "It's beautiful." "I don't know how to finish it," Emma admitted, and for the first time she sounded young and uncertain. "I tried, but my stitches aren't as good as hers. I thought maybe you could help me." It was an offering, Sarah understood, an olive branch extended, carefully, ready to be withdrawn if Sarah didn't handle it properly. "I'd be honored," Sarah said. "We could work on it together. Your mother started something beautiful. We can finish it for her." That became their evening ritual. After the supper dishes were cleared and Samuel and Grace were in bed, Sarah and Emma would sit by the fire with the quilt spread between them. At first, they worked in silence, but gradually, Emma began to talk. She talked about her mother, how Rebecca had loved to sing while she worked, how she'd taught Emma to identify birds by their calls, how she'd been gentle with everything except injustice. She talked about the day her mother died, how Emma had been the one to run for help, how she'd felt responsible somehow for not being able to save her. "Papa said it wasn't my fault," Emma whispered one night, her needle pausing in the fabric. "But I keep thinking if I'd run faster, if I'd done something different." "Emma, look at me." Sarah waited until the girl met her eyes. "Your mother's death wasn't anyone's fault. These things happen, as terrible and unfair as that is. You were a child. You are a child. You did everything you could, and your mother knew you loved her. That's what matters." Emma's tears fell onto the quilt, and Sarah pulled her close, letting her cry in a way she probably hadn't allowed herself to cry in front of her father or siblings. When the storm passed, Emma whispered, "I'm glad you came. Don't tell Papa, but I was hoping he'd find someone." Sarah's heart clenched. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm just here to help." "I know, but still." Emma pulled back, wiping her eyes. "You make Papa smile sometimes. He hasn't smiled much since Mama died." Sarah hadn't noticed she was making Caleb smile, but Emma's observation made her suddenly acutely aware of him. He'd been moving through her days like a shadow, present but not engaged, there but not really seen. Now she found herself watching him. She noticed things she'd missed before. The way he was patient with Samuel's endless questions, taking time to explain how to read animal tracks despite his long days. The way he checked on the children every night before going to his own rest, his hand gentle on each small head. The way his eyes lingered on Rebecca's apron, still hanging on its peg, as if he couldn't quite bring himself to move it. One evening, cabin fever drove them all a little wild. Samuel was bouncing off the walls with pent-up energy. Grace was fussy, and even Emma seemed restless. Sarah, watching Caleb's jaw tighten with each new bout of noise, made a decision. "Who wants to play a game?" she announced. They ended up playing a simple guessing game with Samuel acting out animals for everyone to identify. He threw himself into it with such enthusiasm that even Caleb's stern expression cracked. When Samuel tried to be a bear and instead looked more like a confused rabbit, Caleb actually laughed. A real, genuine laugh that transformed his entire face. Sarah found herself staring. When he laughed, Caleb Monroe looked years younger, the grief falling away to reveal the man he might have been before loss carved him hollow. Their eyes met across the room, and something passed between them, an awareness that went beyond employer and employee, beyond two adults simply sharing space. Caleb looked away first, his smile fading, but Sarah's heart continued its unsteady rhythm. That night, she couldn't sleep. The cabin was too warm, her thoughts too restless. She finally gave up and came down to the main room, thinking she'd sit by the bank fire for a while. She wasn't alone. Caleb sat at the table, a cup of something, coffee or whiskey, she couldn't tell, between his hands. He looked up when she appeared, and in the firelight, his face was all shadows and angles. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Too much on my mind." Sarah hesitated, then took a seat across from him. "I hope I didn't disturb you." "You didn't." He studied his cup. "I don't sleep much anyway." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Caleb spoke, his voice low and rough. "I worry I'm failing them. The children, they need more than I know how to give." Sarah considered her words carefully. "You're doing the best you can. That's all any parent can do." "Is it enough?" "They're thriving, Caleb. Look at them. Really look. Samuel's curiosity and energy, Emma's strength, Grace's gentle spirit. Those are gifts from both you and their mother. You haven't failed them." He looked at her then, really looked, and Sarah felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. "You've given them something I couldn't, joy. I see them laugh with you, see them relax. Since Rebecca died, this house has been like a tomb. You brought it back to life." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. "They're wonderful children," Sarah said softly. "It's easy to find joy with them. It wasn't always easy for me." His admission was quiet, almost ashamed. "After Rebecca died, I could barely look at them without seeing her, seeing what I'd lost, especially Grace. She looks so much like her mother. And now when I look at them, I see them. Who they are, not just who they came from." He paused. "Because of you." Sarah's throat tightened. "I just did what needed doing." "It's more than that." Caleb's hand moved across the table, not quite touching hers, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of it. "You've been a gift to this family, Sarah. To all of us." The moment stretched between them, full of things unsaid, questions unasked. Sarah became aware of how alone they were, how quiet the night, how intimate this conversation felt. She saw the same awareness in Caleb's eyes, a dawning recognition that what had started as a practical arrangement was becoming something else, something that scared them both. Caleb pulled back first, standing abruptly. "Should get some sleep. Dawn comes early." "Of course." Sarah stayed seated, needing a moment to collect herself. At the base of the ladder to the loft, Caleb paused. "Sarah?" "Yes. Thank you for everything." Then he was gone, climbing to his children, leaving Sarah alone with her racing heart and the dangerous realization that somewhere in the last 2 months, she'd stopped seeing Caleb Monroe as her employer and started seeing him as something far more complicated. The fire crackled, and outside, the wind whispered through the pines. Sarah touched the ring around her neck. Samuel's ring, a reminder of the last time she'd let herself care for a man. But Samuel was dead, and Caleb was very much alive, and the winter ahead would keep them all trapped together in this small space where boundaries were becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. Sarah went back to her room and lay awake, listening to the house breathe around her. Somewhere above, Caleb was probably doing the same thing, lying awake, thinking thoughts that mirrored her own. The snow continued to fall, sealing them in, and Sarah wondered what the long winter would bring. Deep winter settled over the mountains like a heavy blanket, and with it came the close quarters and forced intimacy of people trapped together. The snow piled high against the cabin walls, and for 3 days straight, Caleb couldn't leave to check his trap lines. They were all stuck together, 3 children, 2 adults, and a growing awareness that crackled between Sarah and Caleb like static before a storm. On the second day of confinement, Samuel's energy reached unbearable levels. He bounced around the cabin like a rabbit, unable to sit still, driving Emma to distraction and making Grace whimper with overstimulation. "Samuel Monroe, if you don't settle down," Caleb started, his voice tight with strain. "He just needs to move," Sarah interrupted gently. "Being cooped up is hard on children." She caught Samuel mid-bounce. "How about we build a fort with the blankets?" What followed was controlled chaos. They draped blankets over chairs and the table, creating a cave-like structure that the children could crawl through. Even Emma, trying to maintain her dignity as the eldest, eventually gave in and joined the fun. And somehow, Sarah convinced Caleb to help hold up one corner of the blanket fort. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, but there was the hint of a smile tugging at his mouth. "This is childhood," Sarah corrected, watching Grace giggle as she crawled through the tunnel Samuel had created. "Let them have it." In the dim light of the blanket fort, with his children's laughter echoing around them, Caleb looked at Sarah and smiled, really smiled. And Sarah felt her heart do something dangerous in her chest. That night, after the children were asleep and the fort was dismantled, an awkwardness settled between them. They were too aware of each other now, too conscious of hands nearly touching when passing dishes, of eyes meeting and holding a beat too long. "Tell me about your husband," Caleb said suddenly, breaking the tension with words that somehow made it worse. Sarah's hand went to the ring around her neck. "Samuel? He was kind, patient. He married me knowing I might not be able to give him children, and he never once made me feel like less for it. How did he die?" "Fever. It took him in 3 days. He was fine one morning, and by the end of the week he was gone." She touched the ring. "I keep this to remember that I was loved once, that I wasn't always just a burden." "You're not a burden," Caleb said firmly. "Not here. Not to us. Your children might say differently." "They'd be wrong." He leaned forward, his eyes intense in the firelight. "Sarah, I need you to understand something. When I brought you here, I thought I was just hiring help. Someone to cook and clean and watch the children while I worked. But you've become—" He stopped, struggling for words. "You've become part of this family. The children need you. The children need me," Sarah repeated softly. "What about you, Caleb? What do you need?" The question hung between them, dangerous and raw. Caleb's jaw worked, and Sarah saw the war happening behind his eyes. Duty versus desire, loyalty to his dead wife versus the needs of his living heart. "I need—" he started, then stopped. Started again. "I need to know I'm not betraying her memory. Rebecca was everything to me. She gave me those children. She made this house a home. How do I—" His voice broke. "How do I move forward without feeling like I'm leaving her behind?" Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. It was the first time they'd deliberately touched, and the contact sent warmth through her entire body. "You don't leave her behind," she said gently. "You carry her with you. Every good thing she put into this family, every lesson she taught your children, every bit of love she left. That stays. That's her legacy, and nothing can take it away. But if I—" He looked at their joined hands. If I let myself feel something for someone else, that's not betrayal, that's living. That's what she'd want for you. How do you know? Because if I died instead of Samuel, I would have wanted him to find love again. I would have wanted him to be happy. Love isn't a finite resource, Caleb. Having room in your heart for someone new doesn't mean there's less room for Rebecca. His hand tightened on hers. I think about you, he admitted, his voice rough. More than I should. I tell myself you're just here to work, that this is an arrangement, nothing more. But then I come home and see you reading to Grace, or laughing at Samuel's stories, or teaching Emma something new, and I think, what do you think? I think maybe God brought you here for more than one reason. To save you from Stone, yes. To help my children, yes. But maybe also, he met her eyes. Maybe also to save me. Sarah's breath caught. Caleb, I know it's too soon. I know we haven't. This isn't proper. You're in my employment. You're under my roof. I have no right to tell you these things. But you're telling me anyway. Because I need you to know. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. These months with you here, I felt myself coming back to life. Like I've been holding my breath for 2 years and finally remembered how to breathe. That's because of you. It's because you were ready, Sarah said, though her heart was racing. You just needed time. Maybe, but it's also you. He pulled his hand away, as if the contact was too much, too dangerous. I should sleep in the barn, starting tomorrow. It's not proper, me sleeping under the same roof with you when I feel, when we're not. The barn's freezing, Caleb. You'll die of cold. Better than taking advantage of... He stopped, frustrated. Sarah, I gave you my word I wouldn't, that you'd be safe here. But I can't keep that promise if I can't trust myself around you. Do you want to hurt me? Sarah asked quietly. God, no. Never. Then you're not a danger to me. You're an honorable man who's afraid of his own feelings. There's a difference. Caleb stood, pacing now, agitated. This is wrong. You came here as an employee. I have power over you. You depend on me for shelter, food, safety. For me to pursue anything with you now would be unconscionable. Even if I wanted you to pursue it. The words slipped out before Sarah could stop them. Caleb froze, his back to her. Do you? His voice was barely a whisper. Sarah stood, walking over to him. She placed her hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension in his muscles. I didn't come here looking for love. I came here running from horror, grateful for any port in a storm, but somewhere along the way, this stopped being just shelter. You and your children, you became something more to me. He turned, and they were so close now, close enough that Sarah could see the amber flecks in his brown eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. I want to kiss you, he said, his voice rough with desire and restraint. But I won't. Not while you're in my employment. Not while there's any question of whether you have the freedom to say no. And if I told you I do have that freedom, I still wouldn't believe it. The power imbalance is too great. He stepped back, putting distance between them. But Sarah, when spring comes, if you still want to stay, if you choose to stay, not because you need to, but because you want to, then maybe we can revisit this conversation. Spring is 4 months away. I know. His smile was pained. Longest 4 months of my life, probably. Caleb, this is me trying to be honorable, he said, to do right by you. Please let me. Sarah nodded, understanding even though it hurt. He was right. There was a power imbalance, and any relationship that started now would always carry that taint. But spring would come eventually, and when it did, she would make her choice freely. One thing, though, Caleb said as he headed for the ladder, the brooch I bought in town last month, the jade one. I was going to give it to you for Christmas. It's hidden in the barn, wrapped in cloth. I saw it and thought of your eyes. They've got green in them, did you know that? I didn't know you noticed. I notice everything about you. His admission was quiet, vulnerable. That's how I know I'm in trouble. He climbed to the loft, leaving Sarah alone with her racing heart and the knowledge that come spring, everything would change. Outside, the wind howled, but inside the cabin, something warmer than fire was beginning to burn. Spring arrived slowly in the mountains, melting snow revealing mud and dead grass before new green could emerge. Sarah watched the change with a mixture of hope and anxiety. Spring meant decisions. Spring meant the conversation she and Caleb had been carefully dancing around for 4 months would finally have to happen. The cabin had transformed over the winter. The quilt was finished, draped over the bed in what used to be Rebecca's room but was now simply the main bedroom. The garden plot was ready for planting, carefully planned by Sarah and Emma together. The children laughed more, cried less, and Grace had finally started calling Sarah Miss Sarah instead of just staring mutely. Caleb had kept his word. He'd been respectful, careful, maintaining proper distance despite the growing awareness between them. But Sarah caught him watching her sometimes, his eyes soft with longing, and she knew her own face reflected the same expression when she thought he wasn't looking. They were waiting for spring, for freedom, for the chance to choose each other without the shadow of obligation hanging over them. Then, on a bright April morning when the last snow had melted and the circuit preacher was expected within the month, riders appeared on the trail to the cabin. Sarah was hanging laundry when she heard the horses. Caleb was checking his trap lines, not due back until evening. The children were inside, Grace napping while Emma taught Samuel his letters. 4 men rode into the clearing. Sarah's heart sank when she recognized the lead rider. Ezekiel Stone sat tall in his saddle, a cruel smile on his face. With him were the territorial marshal and 2 men Sarah didn't recognize, hired guns by the look of them. "Miss Bennett," Stone said, his voice dripping with false civility. "Or should I say, Mrs. Stone? After all, we have unfinished business." Sarah's hand moved to the rifle leaning against the cabin wall. "You need to leave. Now." "I'm afraid I can't do that." Stone dismounted, moving with the confidence of a man who knew he had the law on his side. "You see, I've been consulting with lawyers over the winter. Turns out that contract your father signed, the one transferring you to my custody, is legally binding under territorial law." The marshal shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Miss Bennett, I'm sorry about this, but Mr. Stone has documentation." "Documentation of what?" "Slavery." Sarah's voice shook with fury. "People aren't property. You can't sell a human being." "Actually," Stone said, pulling papers from his coat, "under territorial law regarding debts and family obligations, a father has considerable authority over an unmarried daughter. This isn't slavery. It's legitimate transfer of custody in exchange for debt forgiveness. The fact that Monroe paid the debt doesn't negate the original contract. It just means he paid a debt that was already forgiven. Technically, the contract I hold predates his payment." Sarah felt ice in her veins. "That's not possible. Caleb paid before the contract was filed with the Territorial Recorder's Office, yes. But I had it witnessed and dated the day before Monroe's interference. The timing is clear. You were legally transferred to my custody, and Monroe had no right to take you." The marshal looked pained. "Miss Bennett, I don't like this any more than you do, but the law is clear. This needs to be settled by a judge in Cheyenne. Until then, if Stone has legal documentation of custody—" "I'm not going anywhere with him," Sarah said flatly. Stone's smile widened. "You can come voluntarily, or the marshal can enforce the law. Your choice." "Where's Monroe?" one of the hired men asked, hand drifting toward his gun. "Not here," Sarah said quickly, fear for Caleb sharp in her chest. "And you'll leave him out of this?" "Oh, he's very much in this," Stone said. "He stole my property. That's a crime. When he returns, He'll be arrested for theft and possibly kidnapping. Unless, of course, you come quietly. Then I might be persuaded to drop charges against him. Sarah saw the trap clearly. If she resisted, Caleb would be arrested, possibly imprisoned. His children would be left without either parent. But if she went with Stone, she'd be trapped in his house, under his control, until a judge ruled, and judges in territorial courts could be bought. Inside the cabin, she heard Grace start to cry. The sound of Sarah's raised voice had woken her. "Give me a moment to say goodbye to the children," Sarah said, her voice hollow. "Of course." Stone's magnanimity was sickening. "But make it quick, and Miss Bennett, any attempt to run, any signal to Monroe when he returns, and I will make sure he spends the next 10 years in territorial prison. Do we understand each other?" Sarah understood perfectly. She was being taken, and there was nothing she could do about it without destroying Caleb's life. She went inside, where Emma had gathered Samuel and Grace close, all 3 children pale with fear. "What's happening?" Emma whispered. Sarah knelt in front of them, pulling all 3 into her arms. "I have to go away for a little while. There's a legal problem that needs to be sorted out. But I need you to be brave for me. Can you do that?" "Don't go," Grace said, the first full sentence she'd spoken in weeks. "Please don't go." Sarah's heart shattered. "I don't want to, sweetheart, but I have to. When your papa gets home, you tell him I didn't go willingly. Tell him—" Her voice broke. "Tell him I'll be at Stone's house in town, and tell him not to do anything rash. Tell him to wait for the law to sort this out." "The law is sorting it out," Stone called from the doorway. "And the law says you're mine." Emma's face hardened with an understanding beyond her years. "We won't let you keep her. That's not your decision, child." Stone gestured to Sarah. "Time's up." Sarah kissed each child, committing the feel of them to memory. "Be good. Help your father. Remember that I love you." Then she was being escorted outside, lifted onto a horse, her hands tied to the saddle horn. Not tightly enough to hurt, but securely enough to prevent escape. Stone wanted to maintain the fiction that this was all legal, all proper. As they rode away, Sarah looked back to see 3 small figures standing in the cabin doorway. Emma held Samuel and Grace close, her face fierce with determination. Sarah memorized that image, holding on to it like a lifeline. The ride to Dust Creek took hours. Stone rode beside her, his presence a constant threat. "You should have accepted my proposal graciously the first time," he said conversationally. "This unpleasantness could have been avoided. I'll never accept anything from you. You will. Eventually." His voice dropped to something darker. "My first wife learned obedience. You will too. Your first wife died trying to escape you." Stone's hand lashed out, striking her across the face. Sarah's vision swam, but she kept her seat, kept her dignity. The marshal started to protest, but Stone cut him off. "She slandered me. That's my right as her future husband, to discipline her tongue." The marshal said nothing more, and Sarah understood that he was either bought or too afraid to intervene. They arrived at Stone's house as dusk fell. It was a large, well-appointed home on the edge of town, but to Sarah it looked like a prison. Stone's housekeeper, Mrs. Dale, opened the door. An older woman with kind eyes and fearful demeanor. "Take her to the spare room," Stone ordered. "Lock her in. She's not to leave until I give permission." "Sir, perhaps," Mrs. Dale began. "Now, woman." Mrs. Dale led Sarah upstairs to a small room at the back of the house. As she helped Sarah inside, she whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll help if I can." Then the door closed, and Sarah heard the key turn in the lock. She was alone in a locked room, miles from Caleb and the children, trapped by law and cruelty in the house of a man who'd killed his first wife. Outside the window, she could see the mountains rising in the distance, so close and yet impossibly far away. Sarah sank onto the bed and allowed herself one moment of despair. Then she straightened her spine, touched the ring around her neck, and began to plan. Stone thought he'd won. He thought she was helpless. He was wrong. Meanwhile, miles away in the mountains, Caleb Monroe returned to his cabin to find his children crying and a note from Emma explaining what had happened. He read it 3 times, his face going pale, then red with fury. "Papa," Emma asked tentatively, "what do we do?" Caleb looked at his children, the family Sarah had helped him rebuild, the home she'd restored. He thought about her courage, her kindness, everything she'd come to mean to them all, to him. "We get her back," he said, his voice cold with determination. "Whatever it takes." Emma nodded, her face set with the same determination. "What's the plan?" "First, we find allies. Then we find evidence, and then—" His hand moved to the rifle over the mantel. "Then we make sure Ezekiel Stone never hurts anyone again." The mountains stood silent, witness to his vow. Spring had come, bringing not the freedom they'd hoped for, but a test that would require all their strength to overcome. The question wasn't whether they'd fight. The question was whether they'd win. 2 weeks crawled by like years. Sarah counted every hour in her locked room, measuring time by the meals Mrs. Dale brought and the sun's movement across her window. Stone visited daily, never touching her, but making his intentions clear through words and presence. He was waiting for the territorial judge's ruling, confident it would go his way. "You might as well accept your situation," he told her on the 3rd day. "The judge is a practical man. He understands that contracts must be honored, that families have rights over unmarried daughters. You'll be my wife within the month." "I'll die first," Sarah said calmly. Stone's smile was cruel. "That can be arranged too. Ask my first wife." "Oh, wait, you can't. She had an unfortunate accident." He left her with that threat hanging in the air like poison. But Sarah wasn't completely without hope. Mrs. Dale, the housekeeper, began taking small risks. She left the door unlocked for a few minutes here and there, always with a whispered warning about when Stone would return. She brought extra food, clean water, and most importantly, news. "Your mountain man has been asking questions all over town," Mrs. Dale whispered one evening. "About Mr. Stone's first wife, about her death. People are talking." "What are they saying?" "That maybe it wasn't an accident after all. That maybe someone should have asked questions 2 years ago." Mrs. Dale glanced toward the door nervously. "Mr. Stone is getting angry. He knows what's being said. And when he's angry, people get hurt." "Has he hurt you?" The older woman's silence was answer enough. Sarah saw the fear in her eyes, the careful way she moved, and understood that Mrs. Dale had her own reasons for wanting Stone exposed. "If there's evidence," Sarah said carefully, "evidence of what really happened to Martha Stone, would you testify?" Mrs. Dale's hands shook as she gathered the supper dishes. "He'd kill me." "Not if he's in custody. Not if enough people speak up at once." Sarah caught her hand. "Please, you're the only one who knows the truth. Without you, he wins. Without you, other women will suffer what Martha suffered. What I'll suffer if this isn't stopped. I'm just a housekeeper. Who'll believe me?" "Everyone, if you have proof." Mrs. Dale bit her lip, warring with herself. Finally, she reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a handkerchief, stained brown with old blood. This was Martha's, from the day she died. She'd been bleeding from a cut on her head before she fell down those stairs. I found it hidden behind the headboard in her room. I knew it wasn't an accident, but I was afraid. Sarah took the handkerchief carefully, understanding its significance. This was evidence of violence before the fall, proof that Martha Stone hadn't died from a simple tumble downstairs. Keep it safe, Sarah said. When the time comes, we'll need it. Meanwhile, Caleb was building his case with methodical precision. He'd left his children with a trusted neighbor family and spent 2 weeks tracking down everyone who'd known Martha Stone. His first stop had been her sister, Catherine, who lived 2 days' ride away in a neighboring settlement. Catherine had welcomed him with a mixture of hope and bitterness. "I knew Martha didn't just fall," she said, showing him letters her sister had written. "She was afraid of Ezekiel. She'd tried to leave him twice, and both times he'd found her and brought her back. The last letter she sent me," Catherine's voice broke. "She said if anything happened to her, it wasn't an accident. Will you testify to that?" "I will. I should have done it 2 years ago. I should have come for her." "You're coming for her now," Caleb said gently. "That's what matters." His next stop was the town doctor, a tired man who'd seen too much frontier violence to be easily shocked. But when Caleb pressed him about Martha Stone's death, the doctor's expression grew troubled. "I signed the death certificate," he admitted. "Accidental death from a fall, but I had concerns." "What kind of concerns?" "The injuries weren't consistent with a simple fall. She had bruising around her throat, defensive wounds on her arms. The head injury that killed her could have been from hitting the stairs, but it could also have been from being struck with something." "Why didn't you say anything?" The doctor's shame was visible. "Because Stone is powerful, because I have a family to protect, because I told myself I didn't have proof, only suspicions." He met Caleb's eyes. "I was a coward, but if you're building a case against him, I'll testify. It's past time someone did." Caleb gathered other testimonies too. The merchant who'd seen Martha with bruises she couldn't explain. The neighbor who'd heard fighting coming from the Stone house the night Martha died. The minister who'd counseled Martha after she'd come to church with a black eye Stone claimed was from walking into a door. Individually, the testimonies were circumstantial. Together, they painted a picture of systematic abuse and probable murder. But Caleb knew it might not be enough. Frontier justice was often more about power than truth, and Stone had money, influence, and the law on his side. That's when Emma, back at the neighbor's house, had an idea. "Papa," she said when Caleb returned to check on the children, "what about the circuit preacher? He's due in town next week. If he arrived and found everyone talking about Mr. Stone, if there was going to be a wedding and people were protesting it." "The preacher has no legal authority," Caleb started. "But he has moral authority," Emma interrupted. "And he knew Mama. Remember, he performed your wedding. He baptized all of us. If he spoke against this, people would listen." Caleb stared at his daughter, seeing her mother's intelligence shining in her young face. "Emma, that's brilliant." "I know," she said simply. "So what's the plan?" Caleb knelt in front of his children, including them in the conspiracy because they'd already proven themselves worthy of trust. "Stone wants to marry Sarah to legitimize his claim on her. The judge has scheduled a hearing for 3 weeks from now, but Stone's pushing for a wedding before that. He thinks if they're married, the judge won't rule against him." "So we stop the wedding," Samuel said, following the logic. "We expose him before he can marry her," Emma added. "Exactly. But it needs to be public. It needs to be witnessed by enough people that Stone can't threaten his way out of it." Caleb looked at Emma. "Can you write?" "Mama taught me." "Good. We're going to write letters. Lots of letters. To everyone who knew Martha Stone. To the territorial governor. To the newspaper in Cheyenne. And we're going to make sure everyone knows the truth about Ezekiel Stone." While Caleb built his case, Sarah endured. Stone's daily visits became more aggressive, his patience wearing thin. He'd moved from veiled threats to open ones. "The hearing is in 10 days, he told her, "but I've arranged for our wedding to happen in 5. Once we're married, the law won't interfere between husband and wife. You'll be mine in every way, whether you consent or not. I'll scream the entire ceremony. I'll tell everyone you're forcing me. You'll be gagged if necessary. The territory has seen stranger frontier weddings. People will talk for a few weeks, then forget. His hand reached out to touch her hair, and Sarah flinched back. You should have made this easier on yourself. Now when I finally have you, I won't be gentle. You'll learn what rebellion costs. After he left, Sarah sat shaking, understanding that time was running out. In 5 days, she'd be forced into marriage with a murderer. Once the ceremony happened, escape would be nearly impossible. Frontier wives had no rights, no recourse. Stone could do anything to her, and the law would call it his marital privilege. That night, Mrs. Dale brought news that changed everything. Your mountain man is back in town, she whispered. He's not alone. He's brought witnesses, people ready to testify about Martha's death. The preacher arrived early and is asking questions. Mr. Stone is furious. He's moved the wedding up to tomorrow. Sarah's blood ran cold. Tomorrow? Noon. He's afraid if he waits, his case will fall apart. He thinks if you're married before the hearing, it won't matter what anyone testifies. Mrs. Dale pressed something into Sarah's hand. A small key. This opens the back door. At dawn, it won't be locked. If you run, Stone will have you arrested for helping me. I don't care anymore. I've been a coward long enough. The older woman's eyes were fierce. Martha died because people like me didn't speak up. I won't let the same thing happen to you. After Mrs. Dale left, Sarah held the key and made her decision. She couldn't run. That would make Caleb's legal case harder, would make her look like she was fleeing lawful custody. But she could refuse. She could make Stone's forced wedding so public, so obviously coerced, that even a corrupt judge would have to acknowledge the truth. She touched the ring around her neck and thought of Caleb, somewhere in town, fighting for her. She thought of Emma, Samuel, and Grace, who'd already lost one mother and were in danger of losing the woman who'd become like a second mother to them. She thought of Martha Stone, who died trying to escape the man who was supposed to love her. Tomorrow, Sarah would face Ezekiel Stone. Tomorrow, the truth would come to light, or Sarah would die trying to reveal it. There was no middle ground anymore, no room for compromise or patience. Tomorrow, one way or another, this would end. Sarah spent the night awake, preparing herself for what was to come. She prayed for strength, for courage, for justice. She prayed for Caleb and the children, and she prayed that somehow, despite everything, the right side would win. Because if it didn't, if Stone succeeded in forcing this marriage, Sarah knew she'd end up like Martha, another woman dead at the hands of a man the law had failed to stop. But she wouldn't go quietly. Martha had died alone, frightened, with no one to witness her murder or speak for her justice. Sarah would make sure the whole town watched. She'd make sure everyone knew the truth. And if Stone wanted to kill her, he'd have to do it in front of witnesses who could no longer pretend they didn't see. Dawn came too soon and not soon enough. Sarah dressed in the one good dress she had. Not white, not bridal, just a simple calico that proclaimed her a woman, not a decoration. She braided her hair severely, removing any softness, any hint that she welcomed this. She was ready for war. If I can't have her, no one will, Stone snarled, lunging toward Sarah with the knife. Caleb moved faster than Sarah had ever seen anyone move. He intercepted Stone, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting until the knife clattered to the floor. But Stone was driven by desperation and fury. He threw a wild punch that connected with Caleb's jaw, then dove for the knife again. The parlor erupted into chaos. Women screamed, men moved to intervene. But the fight between Caleb and Stone dominated the space. Two men locked in a struggle that went beyond just physical combat. This was about justice, about protection, about everything Stone represented and everything Caleb opposed. Stone fought dirty, going for eyes and throat. But Caleb had spent years in the mountains, had faced down bears and mountain lions, had learned to fight when fighting meant survival. He was methodical, controlled, using Stone's rage against him. When Stone finally managed to grab the knife, Caleb caught his wrist again. They struggled, the blade wavering between them, close enough that Sarah could see the light glinting off steel. "Stop!" the marshal shouted, drawing his weapon. "Both of you, stand down!" But Stone was beyond reason. He twisted in Caleb's grip, trying to redirect the blade toward Sarah, and Sarah understood with horrible clarity that he meant to kill her, even if it cost him his own life. If he couldn't possess her, he'd destroy her. Then Mrs. Dale picked up the heavy iron poker from the fireplace and brought it down on Stone's shoulder. Not hard enough to seriously injure, but hard enough to make him drop the knife and cry out in pain. The marshal and 2 other men rushed forward, finally subduing Stone and getting him in restraints. He fought like a wild animal, screaming threats and curses, all pretense of civilization stripped away to reveal the monster beneath. "You're all witnesses," he shrieked. "She's mine. The contract says she's mine. The law?" "The law says you're under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon," the marshal said grimly, "and pending investigation for the murder of your first wife. Take him." As Stone was dragged from the house, still screaming, Sarah felt her legs give out. She would have fallen if Caleb hadn't caught her, pulling her against his chest, his arms solid and safe around her. "I've got you," he murmured. "You're safe. I've got you." Sarah buried her face in his shirt and let herself shake, all the fear and tension of the last 2 weeks finally breaking free. Around them, the crowd buzzed with shock and excitement, but she barely heard it. All that mattered was Caleb's heartbeat under her ear, his hands steady on her back, his presence proving that she was truly free. The preacher approached them gently. "Miss Bennett, are you all right?" Sarah lifted her head, wiping tears from her face. "I am now." The marshal returned, looking tired and troubled. "Miss Bennett, I owe you an apology. I should have questioned Stone's claim more carefully. The law may have been on his side technically, but justice clearly wasn't." "What happens now?" Caleb asked, his arms still around Sarah. "Stone will be held for trial. Between the testimonies we've heard today and the physical evidence Mrs. Dale preserved, I believe we have a strong case for murder. At minimum, he'll face charges for the assault we all witnessed." The marshal looked at Sarah. "You're free to go wherever you choose, miss. The contract Stone held is void. It was obtained through coercion and was morally reprehensible, regardless of its technical legality." "Thank you," Sarah whispered. Catherine approached, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for speaking up, for fighting him. Martha would be—" Her voice broke. "She'd be so grateful." Sarah embraced the woman who'd been her sister-in-law through tragedy. "I'm sorry I couldn't save her." "But you made sure justice came for her," Catherine said. "That's not nothing." As the crowd began to disperse, Sarah found herself surrounded by people offering support, apologies, and promises to do better next time. The town that had stood silent while Stone terrorized women was finding its voice, though Sarah couldn't help but notice it had taken a near murder in front of witnesses to wake them up. Mrs. Dale approached last, her weathered face showing relief and fear in equal measure. "I'll need to find new employment now." "You'll find it," the merchant assured her. "My wife's been needing help. Consider yourself hired, with a salary Stone never paid you." Finally, the house emptied until only Sarah, Caleb, and the preacher remained. The old man looked between them with knowing eyes. "I take it you two have your own business to settle." Caleb looked down at Sarah, his hand cupping her face with infinite gentleness. "Sarah Bennett, will you marry me? Not because of debt or obligation or employment, but because I love you, because these months with you have brought me back to life, because I want to spend every day I've left making you happy." Sarah's tears started again, but these were different, tears of joy, of relief, of hope finally fulfilled. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." The preacher smiled. "Well then, I'm already here, and witnesses are still gathering outside. Shall we have a real wedding today?" Sarah laughed through her tears. "I'd like that very much." 6 months later, autumn painted the mountains in gold and crimson, and Sarah stood in the garden she'd planted with Emma, watching the children play in the afternoon light. Her hand rested on the gentle swell of her belly. 5 months along, carrying what the doctors in Dust Creek had said was impossible. "Miracles happen," the new doctor had told her, the one who'd replaced the old doctor who'd moved east. "The body is mysterious. Sometimes what we think is permanent isn't." Sarah preferred to think of it as a gift, one she'd stopped hoping for, and therefore couldn't help but treasure more deeply. Caleb had cried when she told him, had pressed his forehead to her stomach and whispered prayers of gratitude. The wedding had happened that same day back in spring in Stone's parlor of all places, transformed from a scene of violence into a celebration of joy. Sarah had worn her simple calico dress, Caleb his working clothes, and they'd spoken vows that meant everything because they were freely chosen. Emma had stood beside Sarah as witness, her face glowing with happiness. Samuel had bounced with excitement throughout the ceremony, and Grace, precious Grace, had tucked her small hand into Sarah's and whispered, "Mama," for the first time. That word had meant more than any wedding vow could. Stone's trial had been swift and decisive. The evidence against him, combined with testimonies from multiple witnesses, had resulted in a conviction for manslaughter in his first wife's death and assault with a deadly weapon. He'd been sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison, and the judge had made it clear that any further violence would extend that sentence. Martha Stone could finally rest. Mrs. Dale now worked for the merchant's family and had become a regular visitor to the Monroe homestead, bringing news from town and becoming like a grandmother to the children. Catherine visited occasionally too, finding peace in knowing her sister's death had been avenged and that Sarah had found the happiness Martha had been denied. Now, as Sarah watched her family, because that's what they were, truly and completely, she marveled at how life could transform. A year ago, she'd been a woman her own family saw as worthless, sold like livestock, trapped in despair. Today, she was Sarah Monroe, wife and mother and beloved. "Mama, look," Samuel called, showing her a particularly interesting rock he'd found. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Add it to your collection." Emma appeared at Sarah's elbow, having developed a habit of checking on her throughout the day. "Are you feeling all right? Do you need to sit down?" "I'm fine," Sarah assured her, pulling the girl close. "Stop fussing." "Someone has to fuss over you. You spend all your time fussing over everyone else." It was true. Sarah had discovered that being a wife and mother suited her in ways she'd never imagined, not because of some biological imperative, but because loving and being loved in return gave her life a purpose she'd been missing. She'd thought her value lay in bearing children, but she'd learned her value lay simply in being herself. The baby was a gift, yes, but so was Emma's trust, Samuel's laughter, Grace's affection. So was the quilt they'd finished together, now covering the marriage bed where Sarah and Caleb built their life together each night. So was the garden that combined Rebecca's planning with Sarah's care, honoring the past while nurturing the future. So was the moment each evening when Caleb came home from the trap lines and his whole face transformed at the sight of his family waiting for him. He came now, emerging from the tree line with his day's catch. The children ran to greet him, and he swept Grace up in one arm while ruffling Samuel's hair with his free hand. Emma hung back, trying to maintain her dignity, but Caleb dropped a kiss on her head anyway. Then he came to Sarah, and the look in his eyes still made her breath catch. He kissed her gently, his hand resting on her belly. "Good day," he asked. "Perfect day." That night, after the children were asleep and the cabin was quiet, Sarah and Caleb sat together on the porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. This was their time, The peaceful hour when they could simply be together without responsibilities or interruptions. "I was thinking," Caleb said, his arm around her shoulders. "We should talk about names. For the baby. Any thoughts? If it's a girl, I'd like to call her Rebecca, after her mother." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "Not to replace her, but to honor her. Is that all right with you?" Sarah leaned into him, understanding what he was offering, acknowledgement that Rebecca would always be part of their family, that loving Sarah didn't mean forgetting his first wife. "I think that would be beautiful. And if it's a boy—" "Samuel," Caleb said, "after your first husband." "Same reason." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "You'd do that. He loved you well from what you've told me. He deserves to be remembered." Caleb turned to face her, his hand cupping her cheek. "Sarah, I need you to understand something. I don't love you because Rebecca is gone. I don't love you as a replacement or a second choice. I love you because you're you. Strong, kind, brave, beautiful. You saved my children, yes. But more than that, you saved me." "We saved each other," Sarah corrected. "You gave me a home when I had none. You gave me value when my own family said I had none. You gave me love when I thought I'd never feel it again. Then we're even." Sarah laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet mountainside. "Not even close. But we have a lifetime to figure out the balance. A lifetime." The words that had once seemed like a threat, a lifetime trapped in loveless obligation, now sounded like a promise. A lifetime of autumn evenings and children's laughter. A lifetime of gardens planted and quilts stitched. A lifetime of love freely given and gratefully received. Inside the cabin, Grace called out in her sleep. Without discussion, both Sarah and Caleb rose to check on her. They found her tangled in blankets, the rag doll Rebecca had made her clutched tight. Sarah straightened the blankets, while Caleb tucked the doll back into Grace's arms. "Sweet dreams, little one," Sarah whispered. "Love you, Mama," Grace murmured without waking. Caleb's hand found Sarah's in the darkness, and they stood together, watching their daughter sleep. Above them, Emma and Samuel slumbered peacefully. Beyond the walls, the mountains stood eternal and protective, and in the corner of the room, barely visible in the dim light, Rebecca's apron still hung on its peg, no longer a shrine to grief, but a reminder that love transcends loss. Sarah had been sold by her family for being barren, had been told she was worthless, had been treated like property with no value beyond what she could produce. But standing in this small cabin with Caleb's hand warm in hers, surrounded by children who called her Mama, carrying a child she'd thought impossible, Sarah understood a truth her family had been too blind to see. Worth wasn't measured in what you could give others. It was measured in how you loved and let yourself be loved in return. It was measured in the families you built from broken pieces, in the gardens you planted in rocky soil, in the hope you maintained when everything said hope was foolish. She was Sarah Monroe, and she was enough. She had always been enough. The mountains understood. They'd seen countless lives come and go, had witnessed tragedies and triumphs, had stood silent witness to broken people becoming whole. Tonight, they stood guard over one more miracle. A woman who'd been sold finding herself priceless, a widower who'd stopped living learning to thrive again, and children who'd lost their mother discovering they had room in their hearts for two kinds of love. Outside, the first stars of evening blazed cold and distant. Inside the cabin, warmth and love and family. Inside the cabin, home. And that, Sarah thought as Caleb pulled her close, was worth more than anything money could buy.